Okay, we're live. Well, cool. Well, hey everybody, this is Russ McCary. We're doing Deconstruction episode 10, and I have Phil Drysdale joining me here. I'm excited to connect with you here, Phil. We're going to be talking about patriarchy and spiral dynamics in the context of deconstruction. But I'm really excited to have you on, Phil. You've done a lot of research and been part of this deconstruction community for a while. So could you just kind of introduce yourself, talk maybe a little bit about your background, whatever you want to share up front?
Sure. Yep, sure. I grew up Christian, pastor's kid. I was always the kid that rebelled. I was always pushing to find the real truth, and so I bounced around quite a few churches. I think my parents were disappointed and like really delighted in a sense, right? Because I didn't stay in their, traditional kind of path. But at the same time, I was this passionate Christian. I really needed to know what was the right way to be a Christian. And so I was a very passionate Christian, moved around a lot, went to Bible school, went to all sorts of different things. I gave away my entire business so I could pursue God more authentically. I was a very passionate Christian. You couldn't fault my enthusiasm. I'm not sure I was a good Christian, but I was passionate about it. And before long, I was traveling around the world. I was speaking about Christianity to Christians, doing sermons and messages and conferences and churches and all that kind of stuff, going into Bible schools, going into colleges and things like that. And as I was doing that, I myself had started to deconstruct my faith. My faith had started to be challenged in ways. My faith was always challenged. I think one of the things about a misconception about Christianity is it's static. People are always trying to grow within their faith. The difference was that at some point along the path, my growth within my faith started to push outside of the box that the faith belonged in. And so I started to ask questions that kind of didn't really fit in the box anymore, or the answers, the conclusions I was finding didn't fit in the box. And so I was starting to question a lot of my own faith. And here I was on this pulpit, giving sermons and stuff going, I don't know what I believe about this. Let me try and be authentic and not lie, talk about what I believe, but maybe I'll pick and choose what I talk about based on this audience and where I'm at. But what was interesting is as I was traveling and as I was giving these messages and speaking, people would come up to me at the end and they'd talk to me and they'd be like, hey, can I ask you some stuff? And what you found is that when you're traveling and speaking, you kind of have this anonymous kind of concept where people know that you're not going to out them. They know that you don't even know who they are. So they can kind of ask you questions or open up to you in a way that they can't do with their pastor or even their partner or their family members or their friends, because potentially sometimes when you're growing up in a fundamental religion, saying, hey, I'm not sure I believe that to your leader, to your friends, to your family members can be a real dangerous thing. That can very quickly have you on the outside of the group. But talking to me was safe. And what I found in all the places I was going was there were dozens of people, sometimes hundreds of people talking to me that didn't believe what their group believed in some way, shape, or form. They had questions, they had doubts, they weren't sure. And I started to realize maybe actually there's a need for people to go on this journey in a more intentional way, have space to process, have space to question, maybe have someone safe to talk to. And this was quite a while ago, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 8-10 years ago, I was starting to question this and think about this. And I was still very much in the Christian world at this point, but personally deconstructing a lot of my beliefs. And so I started to speak about this more openly, talk about the process of deconstruction, questioning your faith, or being open to questioning it and exploring what you believe to be true and pursuing truth. And I've been doing that ever since. I now talk with people every day, all day, hundreds of people every day via Messenger and things like that. I do podcasting. I interview experts in the area. I interview regular people like me, that were just someone that got caught up in questioning their faith. People end up across a whole spectrum of endpoints, if there is an endpoint to this. So it's not just that these are Christians that are slightly fringe Christians. That can be true. Maybe they become a bit more progressive or a bit more out there as a Christian. But sometimes they become agnostic or atheist or New Age, or maybe they go into Buddhism or Taoism or, Islam, or, I've known people to go into Judaism. And so it doesn't always end the same way, but people are starting from the same point of going, I'm not sure the faith I started with has all the answers for me. And so that's what I do day in, day out, is I help people on that process. I do research and gather data about that as well. And I help people network and find other people that are going through this process as well.
Great.
Sorry, a bit of a ramble, but it's a lot.
No, it's good. It's good. I wanted people to know who you are. And I've already linked, there's a link in the description to your YouTube channel. You've got a lot of free content on there. You do interview a lot of folks. And there's a lot of good free resources too. In fact, we're going to be talking about spiral dynamics. You've got 20 hours?
Something like that. Yeah,
something
15,
like
17 hours, something like that. I don't know what it is.
I don't know how you did those videos.
And it's still incomplete. I have hours and hours I'd like to add to that, but I haven't found the time. But yeah, there's so much there that I'm like, oh, I'm scratching the surface. So yeah, it's a big topic.
I was listening them, having a hard time getting through 3 hours. I was like, how did he record this and prepare for this?
Yeah, in one go. Almost all of them were I just stood there in front of a camera and just talked for 3 hours straight or whatever.
That's wild. That's wild. Well, thanks again for coming on. I'm excited to discuss this today. I've told some of my viewers, my whole deconstruction series kind of hinges on Mark Karris's idea of splinters. So I just talk about my different splinters that I've had through the process and each of those topics. The reason that I'm doing that is I think when it comes to deconstruction, people want to slap a label on why you're doing it and move on. That aligns with their a priori worldview. And so the purpose of my series is just to say, hey, there's a lot of areas to have questions in. And when people deconstruct, there's a lot of things that they're working through. But what I've found in my own deconstruction process is it seems to be at the core of what we assume in our worldview, that the fundamentalist view, regardless of what religion you're talking about, is a very static perspective. And what you start seeing, when you deconstruct and you're more open to it, is that, as you mentioned, there is progression, not only within a religious box, but oftentimes beyond that. And so as I've kind of dug into that, I've seen this distinction between a very patriarchal worldview, mostly in Christianity, in the circles that we came from, versus, more progressive view. Spiral dynamics is one way to view it progressively, but, you've talked about other things like just ethical maturity, the different phases of ethical maturity. So there's a lot of different ways to look at that. But the point is, one is very static and one is very progressive. And I think those two fundamental ways of viewing the world really dictate how you interpret different worldviews. And so I thought initially, in this episode, we're going to talk about patriarchy versus spiral dynamics. And you've done a lot of work on spiral dynamics. I have some questions for you on that. But I thought I would define terms.
Sure, please.
And so to set the stage, patriarchy, most people know what this is. It's a social system where men hold the primary power. They predominate all roles, but especially concerning moral authority within religion. So you think of a patriarch, it's the male head of a family or a tribe, a religious tribe, whatever. And essentially, you don't question them. This can include fathers, pastors, teachers, elders, and especially historic traditions and truths that these male leaders of the tribe have determined at some point are the most important things to observe. And when you look at Christianity, this idea of patriarchy is very deeply ingrained in a lot of the assumptions that are made. So that the modern evangelical mindset is very dictated by patriarchy in a sense. There's this big emphasis on the idea that the Bible verse, there's nothing new under the sun. And so there's this assumption that human thinking is static. In other words, it's not progressive, despite the fact that as a culture and society, knowledge, awareness, consciousness seems to be increasing. In this more static patriarchal view, we kind of just slap the term sinner on everybody. Everybody's just a sinner, and we pretty much think and behave the way we have for 6,000 years, according to biblical history. So that's patriarchy, and that's kind of the underlying perspective. But then we have spiral dynamics. So can you this is a very in-depth topic. Obviously, you have hours of content on this. Again, I'm going to link your channel in the description so people can go see it. But can you give a brief elevator speech on spiral dynamics and kind of how it differs from this more static view like patriarchy?
Sure. So spiral dynamics is one of many, many different models of developmental theory. So developmental theory is a subset within psychiatry. And so how we see people's mental cognition developing. And so we can do that on an individual level, or we can break it up more openly into a sociological or anthropological level where we look at how societies mentally and psychologically develop. And we'll probably be talking about it a little bit more on that side of things if we're looking at things like patriarchy. Because patriarchy is much more of a system wide kind of concept than an individual run idea. You don't get very far if it's just you being a patriarchy. You need some people to oppress. You need some people to be above. I also want to highlight as well, we are two white guys. I don't know if you're straight, I'm straight. Like, we are the symbolism of patriarchy, giving a nice little talk about patriarchy. So hold all of that with tension as well, because there probably is going to be stuff that we say that is blind to some of the components that maybe someone that isn't cishet, male, would be aware of. And so I just want to highlight that as well before we start. But so developmental theory is a subset within psychology. So firstly, it's important to say psychology is a field of study maybe 100 plus years old, just. Within that, we started to go, so we've got these things going on in our heads, and people can be psychologically healthy, psychologically unhealthy. They can have a condition, they can have issues, they can have all sorts of things going on in the way that they frame the world and see the world and build their own ego and their worldviews and their values and all these things that psychologically happen. Along the way, about 85, 90 years ago, some psychologists said, I wonder if we looked at people long term, would we see psychological development, like a process, a way that people grow up. And so they said, well, let's look at little children and see how they grow up. How do they psychologically develop? And this is where you get child developmental theory. And so we can get child developmental theory. You look at a small child and you go, oh, they start basically not knowing anything. They don't even know that they're a thing. Then they can start to differentiate. They go, oh, I'm a thing. That blanket over there is a thing. And those two things aren't the same thing. That's actually later than you'd think before the child can think that. Later still, they go, oh, the mother isn't me. The mother is a different thing. And then later on they go, oh, it's a different thing that I can't control. For a long time, the child actually thinks that it's controlling the mother. The mother is just an external part of itself. And then as time goes on, they start to go, oh, I'm an autonomous thing. I can choose to say no or yes. And then we quickly learn what it's like to have a toddler, right? When they learn to say no. And then as time goes on, they go, oh, when I say no all the time, everyone else gets upset. Maybe they have feelings and I have feelings, and their feelings aren't my feelings. And so children have these developmental stages that we can identify going, oh, you've learned empathy. Oh, you're building your ego. Oh, you're learning that authority structures are secondary to your own authority structure. And these kind of concepts. I bring up child developmental theory because generally speaking, there's no argument about that. Every person that's had a child can go, yeah, I've seen those stages as it grew up. And now it's an adult, I've seen it kind of come to the later stages of that. That is one model of developmental theory. So other models, like we talked about with ethics and morality, some people like Kolber looked at, can we see how people, as they grow up and develop, do their morality evolve? Does their morality develop? Other people looked at ego, like Cook-Greuter has an amazing study on ego development, how people see themselves as they grow up and develop. Now, the one we're going to talk about is spiral dynamics, which is how people develop values. What values do they have? And so spiral dynamics is a value developmental theory. It's how people grow up holding values. And so what we can do is we can look at people and go, as people begin, as they start their journey, they have these values. Now, the values most people begin with are, I'm going to scream until someone feeds me, make sure there's a roof over my head, changes my diaper, gives me some water. That's about it. That's all I need. Maybe some comfort, some skin-to-skin action. That'd be great. That's about it. Humans at their base level need to be taken care of. Now, we see that as a baby. If we go all the way back in human history, you might see the same sort of thing. If we look at it as a broad scale as society, we can see a similar thing. As you start out as a society, our needs are very simple. They are just literally, we need food, water, we need to have sex so we can reproduce and continue the species. We need shelter. Very basic needs. This might make people think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which again was a developmental theory. It was a developmental theory of needs, how people's needs develop over time. So in spiral dynamics, what we find in individuals, I'll give you a really broad overstroke, is that I'll start with what we're looking at in today's society. The majority of today's society is going to be found in 4 stages, really. You're going to be at red, blue, orange, and green. Now, the reason the stages are given colors rather than names is that the names sometimes carry a weight, right? If I called one stage the idiot stage and the other stage the really smart stage, which stage would you like to find out you're part of, right? You know, now they're not so brassly named, right? They do have different names that different people use. They use things like tribal and magic and fundamental or conventional or modern, postmodern. These different names all kind of get thrown around and used in a mix. But I prefer to stick to colors because they're not so weighted. You know, there's no pro or con to being a green person or a blue person or whatever. Right. Now, let's start at red. Red stage, generally speaking, a person or society at red values their own power and control. They're very much focused on their own individual self. Now, this seems very selfish and bad, maybe because you're at a different stage, but it's actually very important. I think one of the big things about spiral dynamics is all the stages are very important. You can't skip stages. You need to grow up and develop through those stages. This stage basically helps people find their autonomy, get things done, look after themselves, take care of themselves. And generally speaking, what happens is we grow in a stage and then move up to the next stage when we find its limitation. So you talked about static stages and kind of growth, but I'd like to turn it on its head a little bit and talk about horizontal growth and vertical growth. So what you'll find is most people do grow when they seem static, right? So you think of a Christian, they don't grow, they just stay the same. They are growing. They're just growing to be more Christian. It's just very horizontal growth. I'm growing at exactly the same stage of development. Now, what happens is when you keep growing at the same stage, at some point you start to hit some limitations, which may push you to start moving upwards, and you go vertical growth. And so at the ego stage, that red stage, what happens is you start to find, if I'm always focused on me being in control, having my own way met, being in power, people don't really like me. Right? I don't tend to have a lot of friends around me. I'm always watching my back for someone else coming along with a stick to hit me over the head and take power and control. It's a very insecure way to run a society and to live as an individual. A lot of people that are still very much at stage red end up in prison because they only care about themselves and they'll do some terrible things to get their way. So you see a lot of prisons, if you were to look at where they're at in the spiral, you'd find them at stage red a lot of the time. Now, when you hit those limitations, as you grow horizontally, you start to move vertically, you move up to stage blue, which starts to go, maybe it's not all about me. Maybe we need some society. Maybe we need some friends. Maybe we need some community. Maybe it is about family and community and being together. And stage blue is really focused on security, stability, certainty, oneness and togetherness, but it's quite limited in its oneness and togetherness. Don't think of hippies being one with, people over in India when you're in Africa or America. It's not quite like that. It very much is, we're here in Africa, so we care about these people here in Africa. We're a rural town in America at this church, so we care about the people in this church in this rural town, right? It's quite exclusive. It is very much my family, my political party, my town, my country. Nationalism can be very stage blue. Now, a lot of these things we might seem to, again, have negative connotations with, but again, it's part of healthy growth. It's learning, it's not all about me, it's about a community, it's about others. It's learning to work with other people, to let go of your own desires and allow other people to have their desires met. Stage Blue tends to, in order for this to happen, give a lot of its own autonomy over to a person in power, though. It looks to a person in power, whether it's a pope, a king, a pastor, a Bible, a god. And that's why you find a lot of religions at Stage Blue. Because they look to an authority figure to give them the rules, to give them stability, to give them certainty. They like having rules and systems that they just adhere to. They like to believe in a very absolute black and white way of living, because it's very hard to live in a community if you don't have black and white ways of living. If everyone gets to decide what's right, what's wrong, then very quickly society falls apart. The next stage, though, and this is what happens, is people start to find limitations with that and go, well, actually, this doesn't work, though. Life isn't so black and white. There aren't black and white answers to this. And actually, I'm not so sure that that person in charge is the best person to be in charge. Maybe for that thing, maybe the pastor is the right person to be in charge of a church, but he shouldn't be telling me if I should get vaccinated or not. I'm going to listen to a doctor for that. Or he shouldn't be telling me how to vote. I'm going to, listen to some political experts on that and read some papers or something. And so you start to question things. And what happens is that you move up to the next stage, Orange, which is all about self-autonomy and about learning to have your own authority, your own way in the world. It's often called individualism, this stage. And this is what happens when most people deconstruct, is generally they're moving from Stage Blue to Orange. We could go on lots and lots. I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds.
Well,
but yeah.
That sounds like Stage Red. Do you have anything to say about that?
It does. And so this is what you'll find again and again, is that generally speaking, one stage bounces between two kind of extremes. One being very individual and the other being very corporate. And so Red leaned on the individual side. The Blue leans on the corporate side. Orange leans back towards individual. The next stage, Green, is going to lean back to corporate and community. What's interesting is we need to think of, a lot of people think of this growth as like walking up a ladder. So you take a step off of Red and onto the blue rung, and then you take a step off of the blue rung and onto Orange. That's not how it works at all, really. What I'd encourage people to think of is to think of yourself as a circle growing outwards. And so if your circle in the middle was red, when you grow into blue, you put like a blue ring around that red circle. So you're still red. You still have an ego. You still have a desire to be in control and have power and to get things done. That's still part of who you are when you go into Stage Blue. You just learn to temper it, to add these blue components to that, and to prioritize and to go, yeah, I do want control, but actually I want my family to be happy more than that. And I want my friends to, love me, not just resent me or put up with me. And so each stage, so after the blue, you're going to add an orange circle to that. And so it's not that you regress back down to individual selfishness. It's that you add a level of individualism upon red and blue. So you go, okay, maybe I've swung the pendulum a bit further. Maybe I'll swing a little bit back and add a bit of individualism to this, add some more complexity. And really it's about nuance. It's learning that actually we need all of these different stages, all of these different parts. There's problems at each stage that we want to leave behind, right? I don't want to, like you might see the people at Stage Red that end up in prison. Some of Stage Red, I don't want to bring with me, right? You're glad that your toddler learns to say no. You're really glad that they don't just scream no and burst into tears and slam doors and throw toys for the next 20 years though, right? They do go, okay, I've learned to say no. I've learned to establish some autonomy, but I'm going to put down throwing temper tantrums. That's not the most effective way to do that. And so it's about adding upon itself. It's very deliberate in a sense. Now it's all in a lot of ways subconscious. You don't think about this when you grow and develop. You're just adding bit by bit by bit. So you're not throwing away your old self, and you're not regressing. You're growing into something, but you're generally going to kind of bounce between these kind of two extremes. And there's different types of extremes that you're going to bounce between as you move forward as well. But yeah, you're right. It does sound like ego. It does sound like, and it is ego. It's about learning to go, oh yeah, no, I am important. I don't give up all of me just so I can have community. I still need to be an individual in this community. And we see this. This is what happened in the Enlightenment. right? So you had, if you look at it societally, if we go back far enough, culture used to be very red. It was very much my way or the highway. There would be a king or a person in power, and they would lead with a rule of an iron fist. They would, if someone went against them, they would end up murdered, killed, tortured, crucified, lion's den, you know the deal. But what's interesting is, as time went on, those societies didn't really function beyond a few hundred people, beyond a few thousand people. They quickly started to fall apart when we got into cities. Once cities, I think Babylonian Empire was the first major empire. It claimed, I don't know if it was or not, I don't know if anyone's done any studies on this, but it claimed to be 1 million people. And if you think about leading 1 million people by threatening them with a stick, it's just a lot of work. You're going to need a lot of sticks, and you're going to need a lot of people holding sticks. And at a certain point, once you have enough people holding sticks, you kind of transition into blue. You become this system of rules and regulations, and there's a person in power, and actually you have to start creating community and creating... democracy occurs at blue. Blue is not a bad stage. We look at it as a bit, fundamental, a bit stuck in the muds, but blue is really important and really good. But as time goes on, we hit the Enlightenment, and people start to go, it's great that we have police and that we have stability and certainty and safety in our communities, but actually a lot of people give up a lot of freedom to have that, right? What if we could start our own businesses? What if we could, chase our own dreams? What if we could believe our own gods or no gods? What if we could start questioning some of these things that society dictates? In a blue society, this is a Christian nation. Or we all worship the snake god in this tribe, or whatever it might be, and that's not to make a statement of all, anti-tribalism or anything like that. It was just kind of more a glib statement, but I'm going to catch that quickly because obviously plenty of tribes throughout history were much more advanced than a lot of this world can be in the Western world today. And so, yeah, anyway. More rambling. I'm not sure if that kind of answers. It was a really long answer to your quick question. But yeah.
No. Yeah, I think that's perfect. It gives just a general overview of that progression, and I appreciate the clarification on horizontal versus vertical. I think that'll come up again in some of these other questions. People might already be kind of intuiting the connection to deconstruction, but how does this all relate to deconstruction? You briefly maybe mentioned that when people are deconstructing, usually they're going into stage orange. Can you talk more about how you tie spiral dynamics and deconstruction together?
Sure. I mean, deconstruction is a complex word. So you have the philosophy of deconstruction that Derrida came up with, and that's actually quite late. That's at a stage later called green. So that comes after orange, and it's quite a complex philosophy of thought and thinking. And so that's generally not entirely what we're talking about. So I'll put that to the side, but I just want to catch that in case anyone's a philosophy major here and goes, well, that's not what Derrida says, because we're not talking about that really. What's happened is that word deconstruction has become commonly used in a movement of people that are leaving their faith of origin. And so generally speaking, the reason people are leaving their faith of origin is they come from a society and upbringing where there is a faith of origin. If you grew up in a society, you are a Christian. If you were born in Idaho, you grew up in a Christian family, you're going to be a Christian. And you're not even going to be a Christian, you're going to be a First Baptist, or you're going to be a Church of God, or you're going to be a Church of Christ, or you're going to be whatever it is, right? We have our group, and that is our upbringing, and that's what you should be. That's a very blue way of thinking and a blue way of operating. And it brings us together. It works in a lot of ways for a lot of people, and it's very helpful for a lot of people. But a lot of people find it to be very limiting and find problems with it. People like yourself, people like me that have asked questions and have been genuinely passionate about their origin of faith. Their faith origin. They've gone, I really want to figure this out. I want to believe it. I want to live it. How do I do it the best? And you start asking questions. And before you realize it, you go, I can't be a First Baptist anymore. I can't be a Church of Christ. I can't be a charismatic anymore. This isn't adding up. And so you start to realize that these questions aren't finding answers in their place of origin. Your family aren't able to answer this in a satisfying way. You go to your pastor, he can't satisfy it in a satisfying way. In the same way that people in the Enlightenment were starting to go, hey, we're looking at, now people understood the earth to be round before that, but the church still rejected it at this point. They're going, we're looking at the stars and the sun, and we're thinking, pretty sure the sun doesn't revolve around the earth revolves around the sun. And the church goes, no, we can't have any deviance between what we are saying and what you're saying. That can't be. So we're going to have to class you a heretic and get rid of you. That's a very blue response to someone asking questions and coming up with new concepts. And that's what's happening for a lot of people that are deconstructing. They're suddenly going, I'm not so sure that God would burn people in hell for eternity. Maybe God, works on a restorative justice level and brings everyone into heaven, which has historically been an option within Christianity. That's not even that heretical in a lot of ways. But to your group, your blue group, that might be very heretical. And suddenly you think that, you can't even say it, right? Because your mom's kicking you out of the house, or your pastor's kicking you out of the church, or you're going to lose your friends, or whatever it is. And so that's really what's happening at this stage. Now, in a lot of ways, this happens at every stage. At every stage, we kind of hit these walls and we start to question and doubt where we're at and look at new ways of living. So in a lot of ways, every transition can be a deconstruction in a sense. But what this movement is identifying as deconstruction, i.e. leaving their faith of origin and pursuing something new, that very much ties into leaving this blue stage and moving into orange, which is much more about free thought, about thinking, about analytical thinking, about logic, about reason. It's about science. Orange loves all that stuff. It loves looking at the cold, hard facts, looking at who's an expert in this area. I want to understand how old the Earth is. Well, let me find some geologists. Let me find some astrophysicists. These people can tell me how old that rock is. They can look at every layer of the Earth and go, that's when this rock started to cool. That's much more important to someone at stage orange than the pastor opening an old book going, well, this nomadic tribe called Israel, thousands of years ago, said that the earth started roughly 10,000 years ago or whatever, which, of course, that's not what Israel said at all, but the pastor believes it. Right. That holds so little weight to someone at orange now. They're looking for science, they're looking for rational, logical answers. And so it's a very big shift between orange and blue, generally speaking. Not everyone at deconstructing is still orange, however, and often we're at a few different stages at once. So it's a bit more complex.
Well, just I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail on this, but what's interesting that I've been processing about the doctrine of hell, even though it functions inside of a blue sphere, it assumes a God that's very red based on the Old Testament, right? Yeah. And for me, I know in my deconstruction process and processing eternal conscious torment, once I grabbed onto spiral dynamics and just other things, I was like, wait a second, how am I more conscious than the God of the universe, right? Mm-hmm. And so you start thinking through these things in a way that's a little bit more liberal, like you're talking about in orange.
This does tie to patriarchy, though. So we look at these ideas and concepts like patriarchy, like hell, like the nature of God, the morality of God. And at stage blue, we like to have a black and white, simple, thus saith God. And so when God says something about who should be in charge, men, or when God says what will happen when you die, you burn, that is set in stone forever. Now, the problem is that we look back to a culture that was probably very red. For most of the Bible's kind of time frame, beginning through end, most cultures were very red, starting to tiptoe into blue, largely through Roman and Greco influence, right? Greco-Roman influence was what started to push everything a bit more blue anyway. So we open this text and go, well, this is what God says about it. And we read a text written by people that were stage red, that believed that God would burn his enemies or would make you eat your own child if you made a bet with God and got it wrong, or, some weird stuff in there. It's really messed up and bizarre. I mean, I don't even know if that's red. That needs its own color, right? I mean, that's just weird. But the problem is, that doesn't really track with society. So the church has a problem, and this is what we see. So the church for a long time managed to stay very red. You think of the Crusades, very red. We're going to go into the Middle East and kill all the Muslims. If they don't agree, we kill them. Very red mentality, very red. Now, what's interesting is if you break it down with a lot of Christians today and go, what was wrong with that from a biblical perspective? They'd struggle. they go, well, well, obviously it's wrong to just go and kill everyone and perform genocide. Well, is it though? Because in the Bible, when God says to do that to certain cultures, I mean, is it possible that that would be right? You know, people would genuinely struggle with some of the nuance of that, because the Bible says it's okay to go into certain groups of people and wipe them out if they don't convert, if they don't live God's way.
Right.
The pressure isn't from the Bible, and it isn't from Christianity. The pressure is from society. Society has forced Christianity to grow up a bit, and they're being less red because society was more blue. You couldn't exist in a blue society and be red, right? Just like if you're red today, you end up in prison. If you're very, very red, or maybe you end up president, but it's one or the other. It's an interesting dynamic, and I think this is where the patriarchy comes in, and it's fascinating, is that Christianity is still lumped to a text that's written in very, very archaic time that believed very, very archaic things.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's this tendency, so you say deconstruction is more of a general term. You know, that you always have to clarify what you mean when you say deconstruction. Almost like you always have to clarify what you mean when you say fundamentalism, because everybody defines that a little bit differently. But it's interesting, there's this subgenre within the Christian community trying to claim that deconstruction term. And they're okay with you deconstructing, but you need to do it inside of these parameters, right?
Ask questions, but just the ones I give you.
Right. Right, exactly. And so it's an unspoken rule that deconstructing well, as they would say it, involves not abandoning Christianity, and more specifically, not abandoning their version of Christianity.
Of course. I mean, you don't want people to go to hell, right? I mean, that seems like a really reasonable thing to try and keep people in, if you believe when they leave, they go to hell. I mean, I would do everything I could to keep people believing the right thing if I believed that believing the wrong thing meant you burnt forever.
And I'm sure you did, and I did too.
Hands up, definitely I did, yeah.
I was a good evangelist.
I was a terrible evangelist, but I felt guilty about it at least.
So there's one book that I came across in my deconstruction process, because I was kind of trying to dig into different areas and discover what is this deconstruction thing. I know, my deconstruction technically started in 2010, where I started to have majorly different faith views than my family. But it was more of a horizontal move for me. I went from kind of my family to a pastor, and I was like, well, I don't like them as my authority. I'll just hire another authority. And this actually aligns more with the way I see the world. So it's kind of a step into deconstruction. I experienced some rejection, not complete being thrown out of the family, or, my family not knowing what to do with me like it is now. But it was a step in that process. But there's this book that I came across in this subgenre by A.J. Swoboda. He's actually, I think he's a conservative Baptist. He has his PhD or his doctorate. And he wrote this book called After Doubt: How to Question Your Faith Without Losing It. And so within the title itself, that already gives you pause. You're like, okay, he's virtue signaling right off the bat that if you just follow my steps, you can deconstruct the right way. What issues do you see with that in regards to what we're talking about here?
Oh man, there's so many myriad issues. I think at the end of the day, deconstruction is an individual journey. So first and foremost, we should be very cautious with anyone telling us how we need to deconstruct. I come across this. I've talked to thousands and thousands of people over the last decade, and I mean hundreds a week I talk to that are going through this process, and they come to me and go, what should I do? How do I begin this process? I feel totally lost. Like, what's the first step? What book should I read? What question should I ask? And I say again and again and again, I say, what question do you have? That's the question you ask. And try and answer it. And then ask some more questions. And that's how you deconstruct. Now, the difference is one person's question that they have coming into this is going to be very different to another's. If you grew up in a different environment, you maybe grew up in a different family, a different type of Christianity. Maybe you're not Christian. Maybe you grew up in a fringe Christianity, or maybe a completely different faith. Maybe you're deconstructing Islam or Judaism or Buddhism. I've talked to people that are deconstructing from all kinds of different backgrounds. I've talked to people that are deconstructing from the same church who have very different things that they're trying to deconstruct because they have very different questions and doubts. And so I think my first observation is that, generally speaking, if you are telling people what questions they need to ask, never mind what answers they should have about those questions, which I guarantee you'll find in those books, you're completely starting from the wrong place. You're not allowing deconstruction. You're just saying, hey, I've got a fun exercise for you. Let's look at some questions that you might be able to ask. You may have, you may not have, but let's ask those questions, and then let's look at the appropriate sanctioned answers to those questions. And to me, I'm like, you're laughing, but it is laughable from the outside. From it within, you go, oh yeah, this makes sense. Of course, my grandson's deconstructing, or my wife is deconstructing. I want to understand this more. And you listen to your conservative pastor and you go, oh, that's what it is? Oh, okay. Well, they're doing it wrong, or whatever it is.
Right.
But to me,
it
boils down to...
It's the perpetuation of the underlying psychological blue, right?
Yeah, well, and this is the thing, is that people at that stage, we can laugh, but at the end of the day, they cannot grasp what is happening to people that are moving on to stage orange. Generally speaking, you're not capable of thinking. To be honest with you, we struggle to think how we used to think. If I was to say to you, can you think and act exactly like you used to think and act when you were 20? You might go, maybe, but you would struggle, because even in our memories, so psychologists have proved that when we think back to a time in our life, we insert how we think today into that person then. So we even then start messing with our memory, because who I am today is now in that memory. And so our ability to think like we used to is debatable. Our ability to think like we might one day be able to think, it's impossible, right? You can't say to a toddler, try and think like a 7-year-old. That's just not going to happen. They don't have the capacity to think with empathy. It's like saying to a toddler, hey, how does that make your brother feel? They don't know. They don't know that their brother feels different things than they feel. They literally, at the age of 2 or 3, they don't have the capacity to understand someone else feels something differently than what they're feeling right now. They're crying and they don't understand why you're not crying, right? And this is what's happening to the person that's in the conservative church, is they're looking at you going, but I have the same question right here. I just asked the same question you asked and I had the answer, and that's not a problem. So what's going on? I don't understand why you have a question of going, how can a loving God do that? I just go, well, how can a loving God? Oh, well, he's not, his ways are not our ways. Well, problem solved, right? They cannot conceptualize a way of thinking like you are now thinking. They haven't moved beyond their current way of thinking. And so, to be honest with you, I don't bother. I've never even heard of this guy. I think I might have heard of the book. Was he something to do with the Gospel Coalition? Did they kind of like sponsor that book or something? I feel like they put out some sort of...
I think they did. I don't know.
I don't know, right? Because, and this is why, and I say this often, right? Listening to people in that state of psychological development give commentary on what you're going through is utterly meaningless. They have no concept of what you're going through. So really all they're doing is they're putting out a book to pat themselves on the back, and for people that believe the way they believe to pat themselves on the back going, oh yes, this is what deconstruction really is, and my son is doing it wrong, or whatever, right? That's basically what that book serves. Anyone that's actually deconstructing will probably never buy a copy of that book, but if they do buy a copy of that book, they're going to go, this is total crap. Like, what the hell is this person on? They're smoking crack. I mean, this makes no sense. And the third person that reads it is the person that is very heavily cemented in that conservative bubble, can't possibly ask questions because it's not safe. And they are now learning about a whole movement that's happening outside of this, that's being critiqued in this book, and going, I'm going to check that out online. And so to me, I'm like, these people are our best marketers, right? That's all they're doing, is they're giving themselves a pat on the back, and they're pissing off us by misrepresenting us, but what else do we expect them to do? And they're marketing to people that don't know what to do, have never understood that. They don't know anyone's had these questions that they have, and suddenly they are introduced to a whole new world. And so I just don't really pay attention to these people, if I'm honest, because what they have to say on the topic is so beyond useless. It's like, being in an advanced theoretical math class at university and going, well, hold on, let's go back to a kindergarten and like ask a panel of 8-year-olds or 5-year-olds or whatever age you are at kindergarten, let's ask them what they think theoretically 2 plus 2 is. That's irrelevant. They have no concept of the question that you're currently asking. And so they hear 2 plus 2 and they hear 4. You as a theoretical mathematician are looking at some really complex stuff, which opens up that might not be 4. That's not going to be on the table with a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old or probably an 18-year-old, right? And that's what we're doing by going, oh, let's like go and have a discussion with, this conservative evangelical about what deconstruction looks like for them. It's just let them do their thing and move on, because I just think they're just not at that stage of being able to have that conversation. All they're doing is they're trying to make themselves feel safe, feel secure. They're trying to reinforce their world value. I'll give you a quote. Actually, I won't give you a quote. I'll paraphrase Anthony DeMello. I think I'm going to post this on Instagram today, and it will actually be a proper quote rather than what I'm about to butcher. But he says, people like to think they think with their minds, but they don't. They think with their hearts. And once they've made up once they've come to a conclusion, they tell their minds what to think to reinforce it. And this is what it boils down to. We feel what is true, and then we create a whole way of thinking to reinforce it. And that's what these books are. These books are, I am secure, I'm right, I'm going to heaven, I don't want to go to hell, I don't want my loved ones to go to hell, I can't possibly believe that I'm part of a tradition that could be wrong, I can't possibly believe that loved ones of mine might be not in heaven, I can't possibly believe there's not a God or not a heaven or not this or not that, or that I've taught people wrong or whatever. And so, because I cannot possibly engage with those ideas on an emotional ego level, I cannot possibly be wrong, I couldn't possibly engage with that. I go into cognitive dissonance and I tell my mind to teach me that I'm right. And that's really what that book is. It's trying to reinforce, no, I'm definitely right. Don't listen to them. I am definitely right. I think we all do that, by the way. Even when you deconstruct, you still do this. We like to think we're suddenly the rational, logical science people, but we're still doing it as well.
Right. Yeah, it's funny because I had a friend share an article about 10 reasons why people won't listen to you and change their mind. And we all seem to be very immovable psychologically, unless usually, and I think you've talked about this before, but unless we go through something pretty traumatic that really questions that paradigm that we're in, I think maybe what's happening in these books, and I agree with your assessment, but it sounds like they're labeling that horizontal movement as deconstruction.
Yes. Well, that's what they like to be deconstruction, because they like to go, well, I've deconstructed. I'll give you an analogy as well. So this is the point, right? So Christianity has shifted since the 1600s. It shifted away from a faith of works and of action into a faith of beliefs. Now, the problem with a faith of beliefs is you have to have a right belief and a wrong belief. So when you've got the right belief, that's it. We're done. There's no more growth. You can't grow beyond Jesus Christ is the answer to every question. If you say Jesus, you're in. If you don't, you're out. Like, that's the end. And so Christianity has found the end point. If you ask someone, how's your spiritual growth? Where do you hope to be? What do you hope to believe differently in the future? Christians will go, nothing. I have arrived. I believe the right thing. There isn't a thing I hope to change my mind and believe later. And so the problem is what's happened is people that deconstruct have changed their mind. They've moved on, they've developed, they've grown. Like you said, they've become more moral than their God, right? And they go, there's no way I'm worshiping a God that's less moral than me. That's not going to happen anymore. So they move on. But because if you're a Christian, Christianity is the last possible point, there is no moving on. They have to have already deconstructed. They have to have already questioned everything. They have to have already come to the answer, because there can't be something else they haven't thought of. There can't be something else that's better than what they have. And so they label everything else as a stage before where they are. So they go, oh, you're doing what I did, but you're just doing it wrong. Or they go, oh, you're backsliding. You're going back to something wrong, because there is no future. There's no forwards. There's only backwards.
Well, that's interesting too, because I think something else that might correlate is they're seeing red when it's really orange, right? They're seeing that individualism.
Yes. And I had this conversation. I had a conversation with a lovely guy who's trying to write a book about deconstruction, and he's going to feature me and a bunch of other people and highlight how wrong we are. And I said to him, "Hi, I'm happy to consult. I've got data. I do research on this community. I'd love for you to be accurate in what you present. So please let me know if you want any data points or to talk to someone." And so we talked a bit, and he said, "Well, I deconstructed when I was a teenager. I just wanted to explore the world. I often had drink and drugs and partied and slept around, but I realized it was all meaningless, and I really needed that community that church and Christianity provides." And I was like, "Oh, you just were red, and you wanted to experience fully being red, and then you hit the limits of red and became blue. That's not deconstruction. That's just being completely egotistical and being completely in control, completely full of power." But that's how a lot of pastors see deconstruction. Oh, you just want to sin. You just want to be this wild, crazy person. Now, a lot of what people who deconstruct go on to do in their lives will be seen as sin by a conventional Christian, right? So some will go, "Oh, I'm free to be gay, and I've always been gay, and I've just lived in the closet. Well, I'm going to be gay now." So of course the conventional Christian is going to be like, "Oh, see, they just wanted to sin," or something like that. Right. But it's a very different progression than "I want to just go wild and see what happens if I do absolutely everything and do the first thing I feel like doing at all costs." And really, the community of church doesn't answer the questions that people who are deconstructing are asking. Sorry. Anyway, I think that's a great point, though. A great thing that I'm seeing as well is a lot of pastors going, "Oh, you're red." They don't have the language for it. "You're just being red, and you'll find that blue is the real answer eventually." And you go, "Oh no, you're just seeing orange as red, and you can't possibly see orange yet because you don't have a lens for it yet. You just have no language. Your language is only blue and prior stages."
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying too about this book. I'm probably a couple years behind you in my process. And so as I'm transitioning to these different phases, I'm trying to dig into anything that calls itself deconstruction to see what it is. But one of the things that I noticed, actually, it was this book that tipped me off to this distinction between this more static mindset, what you're calling horizontal, and then, the more horizontal approach. But it's interesting because in the book, he sets up these parameters of honoring versus leaving. And basically what's underneath all of what he's saying is that in the Western world, he says we're a leaving world. The default structure of our modern society is we don't care about authority. We just want to do our own thing. And it very much sounds like an accusation of red in a lot of ways. And he has a quote in the book where he says, "In Jesus' time, the default structure of society was to protect, honor, and preserve the past," right? That you can hear the virtue signaling. But now we're in this Western culture, and it's been framed by the Enlightenment. And this is a leaving culture that considers it liberating to set aside the past and tradition. We just ignore it. We just want to do whatever the hell we want to do. And we've ignored all that. And so you can see this distinction here between a static view of humanity. I mean, what's being assumed in all of this is that humans have always been the same. We need to honor the patriarchs, do what they say, and stay in line. And the Western culture wants to step out of line. And I think what's really interesting about this is the reason that Jesus was crucified is because he was stepping out of these parameters.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's wild. It's laughable. He's like, "You've heard it said this. That's ridiculous. It's this," right? You've heard it said, if someone gouged out your eye, gouge out their eye. I say turn the cheek. He's saying we need to leave the way of the path. What's he talking about? Judaism. He's talking about Judaism and saying, no, that's wrong. We need a different way of doing this. Now, he's not promoting Christianity. He's probably talking about a different way of doing Judaism. But the point being is, and this is what's fascinating, right? It goes back to how we believe, how we see the past. I'll give you an analogy, right? So they did this study on young children. So they did a study on 3-year-olds, and they got a tall glass and a short, fat glass, okay? And they filled one with water, and then they poured the water from the tall glass into the short glass. So they both held the same amount of water. And they did this in front of the child, and they said, which one holds the most water? And every single child points to the tall glass, right? It's like when you ask a kid what coin do they want, and they always pick the biggest coin, even though it's not the most.
Right.
They point to the biggest glass. Now, that points to a bunch of different things that are fascinating about children. But the biggest thing that was interesting about the study is they did this 3 years later. They had them come back when they were 6, and they made them watch. They made them do the study, and they said, which one holds the most glass? And they're like, they hold the same amount of water. So they'd obviously developed this ability. Then they made them watch a video of their 3-year-old self and said, this is you, look at your answer. And they could, every single child said, that is not me, and refused to believe it was them. Because they could not believe in a person that believed differently than they do right now. Now, this is what people are doing today. They're going, oh, Jesus, he honored the past just like me. No, you're thinking you are Jesus in this situation. You're going, I see this situation this way, and Jesus saw it that way. No, you're just interpreting how Jesus saw it the way you want. You're going, oh, let's look at patriarchy, right? Let's look at how family structures work, right? So a really common one in conservative environments is that what's happened to society, we should be a single income family with a father making the work and providing for the family, and a mother staying at home and looking after the kids. Do you know there's an expert called Stephanie Kuntz, who's the world's leading expert on marriage and family dynamics throughout history. She did done extensive studies throughout history of how relationships work and what marriages look like throughout history. Do you know the amount of time there have been on Earth, the majority of people on Earth have been single earning families, single person earning families with one of the parents staying at home? The amount of time is 20 years. And the history of Earth that we have documented and can look at, that's how long women didn't work for. And it was the 1950s and 60s. Aside from that, that's never existed. And yet we go back and read in the Bible and go, oh, look at all these women staying at home and looking after kids. No, read Job 31 again. This woman's holding down 13 jobs. She literally is holding down dozens of jobs. She's manufacturing. She's in charge of business. She's in charge of loads of stuff. The guy is dossing, if anything. Yeah, what did I say? Sorry. Well, the wife's dead at that point. No, she's not actually. She's the only one that survives. Yeah, Proverbs 31, right? You look at it and yet we go, oh, look at this woman. Oh, I want a wife like that. She stays at home and does nothing. And I'm like, how did you read that chapter? And she stays at home and does nothing but look after kids. So the point being, we interpret our concept. So even our concept of patriarchy, yes, it was a patriarchal society back then, but you know what happened in a patriarchal society? Women worked their freaking asses off. That's what happens. For all of history, women have worked just as hard as men. Now, it's looked different in different cultures. You look at the shift from nomadic roaming to agricultural, when we started to settle and start planting crops and establishing towns. The shift of men and women working. Women worked just as hard as men, but the roles changed drastically because in agriculture we needed animals and to ride animals to plant the crops, and women had crazy amounts of miscarriages. Now today women have crazy amount of miscarriages, and women's health is a major joke. I mean, it really is. It needs so much reform and work. But historically, women had huge amounts of miscarriages. Now, you go back to that point in time, miscarriages shot up massively because women were riding oxen and cows and horses, and it was causing crazy havoc on their reproductive system. And so very quickly the woman said, we can't work in the fields. We can't be producing food the same way anymore. So men are going to have to completely take over that role, and women are going to have to do other roles. Now, they did lots of work. They did loads of stuff. But it put power in the male's hands in production of food and means in a very disproportionate way. Now, the difference is that women were still producing, they were still doing a lot of work, and they were valued by men on the whole in most societies very much as equals still. And yet we look back and go, oh no, in our idealized Christianity, has my camera gone really blurry? Sorry. Anyway, sorry, got distracted. In our idealized society, we reimagine that time and go, oh no, but men were always in charge and we've always been better and we're better at doing things and women just stayed at home and looked after it. That's not how things work. So we're constantly reimagining the past the way we want to imagine it. We imagine Christianity honors Judaism when realistically for the vast majority of Christians, they spat in the face of Judaism. We imagine that Judaism honored Judaism, but it didn't. Judaism was challenging itself constantly. Even in your Bible, some of the people in some chapters and books challenge other people. Jeremiah challenges Moses. In fact, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Amos, Ezekiel all challenge Moses. They all say, we're not sure about this Moses guy. We're not sure that this is right. Jeremiah goes, God never once gave Moses any laws or any sacrifices for us to do. That's absolute nonsense. And he was exiled for it. And we don't look, we go, oh, no. The Bible, it all just says exactly the same thing. And it's all this unified honoring. No, there's constantly this momentum of moving on. Now, in saying that, it doesn't mean that they don't honor the past. It doesn't mean that they don't honor where they're coming from. I think that's a very natural, healthy part of what it is to move on and grow up. That's what we do. So I think there's a misconstrued labeling and a misconstrued ideology of what's happening. We're looking at people that don't believe things the way we believe anymore, and we think they're dishonoring us. I think that's not necessarily what's happening. I think, and we see them as just leaving, and maybe they are leaving, absolutely. Leaving in some context. But in my opinion, generally speaking, and looking at this through data is really interesting, but asking people, did you want to deconstruct? Most people say no. Did you want to leave the church? Most people say no. Did you want your family to kick you out? No. Most people say no. Did you want all your friends to turn their back on you? Most people say no. It's shocking, isn't it? It's surprising that all these people that are leaving didn't want to leave. And so to me, it's absolute, it makes me mad. I'm trying to choose my words very carefully because it infuriates me that people are labeling their abuse of people that grow up as the people that grew up's immaturity and leaving. They're going, oh no, they're just immature. They're leaving. They don't know how to handle things. They don't know how to honor the past. No, you are being deeply abusive and then gaslighting the crap out of anyone that has a different experience.
Yeah.
Sorry, rant over.
No, well, you hit on the point on the end there that I wanted to hit on, which is there's this correlation between, oh, if you honor me, you think like me. But that's almost another kind of what sounds like a very blue mentality is mixing the two together. As you grow in your ability to see nuance, you see, well, you can actually honor someone. You can honor these earlier parts and stages of your life, but still not behave that way. You can honor the time that you were a teenager as a formative part of your maturity, but you're not going to behave like a teenager anymore.
Right. You can still think, gosh, I'm embarrassed by how much of an idiot I was as a teenager, but still be thankful that you were an idiot as a teenager. That was part of your growing up.
Right. And what you learned and everything you went through. So I think that's the main underlying difference in the distinction is that as you grow beyond these things, what you start to see is that it's progressive. And it's interesting, all the correlations. You know, it's almost like in fundamentalism, you're stuck inside this box. And everybody says you're not allowed to go outside of this box. So what's outside this box? Secular psychology, evolutionists, secular scientists. These are all outside of our box. They are unsafe. And you're demonized if you even go see what they have to say, right? Yeah. You're not allowed to go see that. But it's interesting, as I unravel my deconstruction process, the beginning stages was venturing out to, have those questions answered and seeing, what is evolution really saying? I actually want to kind of look at this and be a little bit more open-minded. Right. And let's not just assume that these are doctrines of demons. Let's go to this a little bit more objectively. And it just catalyzes, okay, wait, these people aren't unsafe. And then what really fucks your mind up, and this is where it starts turning, is when you get far enough outside the box, and then you realize, wait a second, these secular psychologists, these scientists, they're actually a lot safer than the people in my old tribe, emotionally for me.
Yep.
And then everything's backwards now. And I think for a lot of people, that horizontal movement stops. They hit that wall and they're like, wait a second, everything I've been told about reality is not consistent anymore. It's not
Yep.
lining up. The people that I told myself were safe actually ended up being the most harmful to me at many points along the way. And so you start seeing those nuances, and you start, growing outside of that. But in alignment with that, you start to realize with spiral dynamics is very helpful in one sense, and it's that you can start to see people, as you're experiencing that rejection and deconstruction. It's so helpful to have a framework to see, okay, they can't see me, right? They are not going to understand me, because there's something primitive in all of us. I've seen this in myself, like even though I'm completely, in many ways, disconnected from my parents, there's a primitive side of me that wants that little inner child part of me that wants to be connected to them, right? And so it's so devastating to the psyche to break apart and be rejected. But I see spiral dynamics being so helpful in just saying, okay, this is a developmental thing, right? Everybody's doing the best that they can in the phase that they're in. And what you end up having to do is just erect boundaries. And those boundaries are very painful to erect.
Yeah.
But spiral dynamics gives us a reference point that safety, certainty, and security is really important to people in that blue phase. And if we don't have that framework, it's so much harder to navigate. So I was just curious for you, Phil. I know that I sensed in your spiral dynamics series that this has been really helpful for you personally too. Can you speak to that maybe in your own journey and just how it's helped you process, not only your personal life, but just what you see at a larger scale?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that you'll find across all developmental theories, so regardless of spiral dynamics or ego development or whatever it might be, is that a huge part of growing up healthily through that vertical process of growing up through each stage is the process of integration. And so integration, and I didn't really go into this in a huge amount in my series. I'll probably revisit it at some point. But integration is where you look back and you go, I still am the person that grew through red and blue and orange, and there's things in there that are really healthy and things that are really unhealthy. Now what we do is, as we move to the next stage, we tend to, psychologists talk about this, but we tend to disdain the prior stage and we tend to fear the future stage. Now, doesn't that speak well, right? We tend to disdain the stage we've come from. So we tend to, as we deconstruct, start to look down on our Christian upbringing and the people within that stage still. And we start to go, oh, they're just idiots. Why don't they understand? They're just so deceived. They're hateful. They're hypocrites. They're whatever. But that might be true on an external perspective. But from within that world, you were that person 15 hours ago. Were you hateful? Were you hypocritical? You might look at yourself and go, oh, I guess from an external perspective, yeah, I was, but I didn't feel like that. I was trying to be loving. I was trying to be kind. And so again, we can't see ourselves in the past very well. So we mess that up a lot. But what we have to do is we have to go back and integrate those stages. We have to look at prior stages and go, what was the good stuff I learned in there? I guarantee most people that grew up in a church learned some great stuff in a church. They learned family. They learned how to take care of each other, to respect, honor, some of these great values that are so key, right. whether we agree with the different definitions, but we learned a lot of things in those stages. Now, there's other things that we want to put to the side, right? So maybe we learned how to love, but the love was pretty limited, right? So we learned how to love people that looked like us. But people that didn't look like us, maybe a different race, maybe a different sexuality, maybe a different gender, maybe a different nationality, our love wasn't quite expansive enough to include those people, and we go, that's not who I want to be anymore. So I can value that it taught me how to love well, but I can put aside that it had such limitations on who I get to love. And now I'm going to be able to love more inclusively. And so I think for me, it was actually in integrating those stages that helped me understand people that are still at that stage and go, you're doing the best you can. You're doing all that you can. You cannot be any more loving than you are right now. You have a whole bunch of limitations on how you get to love and who you get to love. And you are being the most loving human being that you can be within that box. And I'm not going to hold that against you. I'm going to love you from outside that box and hopefully show you that there's a different way to love, and that maybe you'll get pushed to the end of this stage where you might be forced to grow up a little bit and become a bit more inclusive and a bit more loving. But honestly, a lot of people never will. A lot of people don't grow up through every stage. We kind of find a place that works for us, that sort of fits, and we never move beyond it. We kind of settle and seem quite happy. We grow within that stage maybe, but maybe not even much really in that way. We just kind of get tucked into work and life and family, and that's it. Like you said, unless there's something hugely traumatic, unless you have a loved one die, or you get cancer, or you get divorced, or something really big happens, that might force you out of, shock you out of your comfort zone. But I think that's helped me in a lot of ways in communicating with people, understanding where people are. So like you said, I've got a whole series on how to talk to loved ones about your deconstruction, and understanding that they are primarily driven, their value system is driven by feeling safe, secure, and certain. And they look for that to an authority figure. And so me coming in and shitting all over their authority figure, it's only going to infuriate them. Me coming in and going, well, we don't really know what happens when we die, do we? That just tears apart their safety, their security, their certainty. So I'm not going to do that. Of course we don't know what's going to happen when we die. No one does. No one knows that. Or anyone that does know it, if the consciousness survives death and they do know it, they're not here to tell us. So, we just don't know. But I'm not going to fixate on that. I'm just going to work with where they're at. When they go, and a lot of this is as we integrate our past stages, we're going to be able to be around people at those stages more easily. I think, that's a big part of healing ourselves. And a lot of people have religious trauma and they're easily triggered by a lot of things. I've posted recently about listening to hearing Christian music. People talk about how Christmas is hard for them because they hear all these Christian songs in the stores and stuff. And a lot of people going, hey, it's not even Christmas. I can walk through the, the craft shop, and I won't name the craft shop. They don't need to deserve the advertising, in March, and they're playing Christian music, right?
Right.
And so that can send me to my knees, and I'm shut down, and I'm literally having like a PTSD experience with that, some people. And so it's going, oh, I need to work on that. I need to integrate that. I need to, sit with a therapist and go through that. But I'm not going to hold it against people that like Christian music. Of course they like Christian music. They're Christian. Of course they do. It's insane to go, look at these idiots listen to Christian music. Well, they're Christians. Of course they're going to listen to Christian music. I think just holding things a little bit more open, recognizing, I think a big part, and this is a huge part of understanding developmental theory, is understanding that no stage is right or wrong. Every stage is right for the person where they are right now, until it's not. And then they won't be there. They'll be at a different stage. To look at kindergarten and go, look at this idiot. They don't even understand, theoretical math. They don't even know how to architecturally design a bridge and then build it as an engineer. What an idiot. What kind of 5-year-old are you? You're a 5-year-old. No one would ever say that, right? They go, it's 5-year-olds. I expect them to be 5, And in the same way, if you were at university and you were acting like a 5-year-old, maybe we might start asking some questions, Again, maybe we might put you in office as president. I don't know. But it depends, right? It's complex. But generally speaking, we can look at people and go, well, you're where you are because that's where you need to be. You haven't developed beyond that right now. And I'm not going to hold it against you. And actually, it's not wrong. It's just where you are. In the same way, it wasn't wrong that I was at a conventional stage at one point, and then I moved on to be a bit more individualistic, and then I moved on to be a bit more open and global in my view, or whatever. And being later along the stage is not better than being earlier. Being an old person isn't better than being a 5-year-old. In fact, a lot of old people would like to be 5-year-olds again. But a lot of 5-year-olds can't wait to be an old person, right? We always have this envy of a different stage. But none of those are right or wrong. They're just stages that we are at. And I think holding that intention, looking at someone that's a conventional Christian and going, oh, you're there because you're there. No other reason. Right. That's just where you are.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how their past has influenced them positively too. There's a book by Tom Holland called Dominion that talks about the influence of Jesus on the Western culture.
Yes.
And Tom Holland's an agnostic, but it's really interesting to see just the ripple effects of Jesus' influence. And I just think about that as an analogy. We don't realize a lot of times how foundational our churches were in developing a lot of these categories for us. And so, but it's a hard tension to hold because there's so much emotions involved in the rejection that you experience when you move away. But here's my favorite part, and I know you've got to go soon, so we can kind of finish on this. My favorite part about spiral dynamics is it actually leads to the oneness that even Jesus was talking about. And for me in my personal growth, that's been really exhilarating, is to really feel my love for humanity growing, but also my love for myself growing, and both of those things really coming in alignment. And so there's just the spiral dynamics perspective is just a really helpful way to make sense of a very difficult personal experience that a lot of us go through, which is deconstruction. And the reason I wanted to contrast it to patriarchy is because the effect a lot of times of seeing humanity in a more static way is less effective when it comes to human relationships. And it makes it much more difficult. So thank you, Phil, for coming on.
Of course.
It's been really, really good to connect with you. I wanted to connect with you for a while, and your Spiral Dynamics series was crucial when I felt like my insides were just dying and I had nothing. So I highly recommend anybody, no matter what stage you're in, looking into spiral dynamics. There's been tons of research done on this all around the world with a lot of different people groups, and something that may be helpful for you in your journey. So I'm going to link some of your resources in the description. I've already done that, Phil. And then you've got a Patreon too, where people can support you. What kind of resources do you offer for people who support you?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, I offer everything for free. So all my resources, everything is absolutely free. So I actually am a bit kind of doing myself out of any income here. And it makes my Patreon hard because I don't really know how to offer anyone anything because I've already given it away for free. But with the Patreon, we do have an online community on Discord. If you're on Discord or if you'd like to sign up, it's a great little fun community where we kind of navigate life and talk about life and process our deconstruction together, talk about family dynamics or whatever else is going on, the questions we have. We do monthly Zooms. We do some audio chats on there every now and again as well. And so, yeah, there's a little bit you can get out of that. But generally speaking, it's all free. Dive in, enjoy it. If you really want to support what I'm doing and believe what I'm doing is worth doing. The reason I do things for free is because so many people that are deconstructing have been so abused financially. Most of us have grown up in cultures where the pastors, those authority figures were constantly encouraging us to give 10% of our money, to give offerings on top of that, to give first fruit offering, harvest offering, to buy my book in the foyer, to pay for a new conference. We've got a guest speaker, let's sow into them. And it was constant give. And I just don't want to have any barriers for people who need to do this journey having the best resources available for them, at least that I can provide. I'm not saying my resources are the best by any means, but they're the best ones I can make. But obviously that takes time, money. So yeah, if you want to become a patron, it's patreon.com/Phil Drysdale. Would love to have you in the community. But that's all I offer is some Zooms and Hangouts. So yeah.
Yeah, well, you do some research too.
We do research,
surveys and things like that, right?
So yeah, we do lots of work, but all of it again is free. So you can access all of our research stuff over at Deconstruction Network. Deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help find people in your local area that are deconstructing. A lot of people are very lonely in their deconstruction, and having someone in your local environment to connect with is really important. Connecting on online communities and stuff like that is brilliant. It's lovely to have people in your world to talk to, but it's very different having someone that you can get together and go for a beer with, or sit down and have a coffee, or laugh and cry and hug. And that's such a different dynamic. And often it's really hard to do that with someone that grew up outside the church because they don't get the pain of leaving. And you can't do it with your old friends from within the church because they don't get why you're leaving. And so finding someone in your world that's already in that process, even though they might believe something very different, they get what you're going through. And I think that's really important. So people can do that at the deconstructionnetwork.com. And we're doing research through that as well, and trying to change the narrative, right? You look at these books, it's absolute nonsense, and people see them as experts, right? The Times writes a post about deconstruction, and they ask, the Gospel Coalition or this celebrity pastor what deconstruction is. And hopefully what we're doing by developing research is actually getting cold hard data that they can point to. So instead of the pastor going, well, actually deconstruction is just a nice way to say you become an atheist, and we can actually point to some cold hard data and go, well, actually the data says that this % of people become atheists, and it's very low, so actually that's not true, so try again. And that's really exciting to have that kind of data. And again, people can dive into that. They can be a part of our surveys just by going to deconstructionnetwork.com/research. And all of our data and our surveys and our responses and everything, we make all of that data. We publish all our reports, and all of that is available for free for people to engage with and to write about and talk about and stuff. So, yeah.
Well, great. Well, I'm really excited about what you're doing. I've done your surveys, and thanks a lot for coming on, Phil. It really, you've helped me a ton. And anybody else who's on this journey can really benefit from what you're doing. So I look forward to engaging you more, hopefully in the future. And I appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Have a good day, man. See ya.
All right. Ciao.
All right. So I'm going to finish up real quick here. So hopefully this episode has communicated for you that religious fundamentalism hinges on a deeper assumed truth. We talked about spiral dynamics, but in alignment with a patriarchal view, the deeper assumed truth is that human consciousness is static. In general, we're no different than we were 6,000 years ago and can learn most of what we need to know from the past. The assumption that we know more today than we ever have is dangerous in this view. And we need to be respecting our tribe leaders and honoring them to the degree that we agree with most of what they say. Otherwise, we're in dangerous territory. Or, as we've been talking about, in alignment with spiral dynamics and what sociology, science, human psychology are all revealing, while we can definitely learn from prior stages and definitely learn from the past, it is not our ultimate authority or end. Life is progressive, and so is collective human consciousness. In the same way, as I mentioned, we can honor our teenage years as a formative part of who we are. We don't want to think like a teenager anymore. That's counterproductive. So in the same way, spiral dynamics aligns with the progressive form of human consciousness where we're coming to a greater understanding of reality over time. And in my deconstruction, I've gotten to a place where I've elected to see the world this way. And I think it aligns more with reality. And even the progression that we see in the Bible itself and the things that Jesus said and the things that Jesus did. So this distinction is why many in the Christian camp see deconstruction as apostasy and backsliding, while we who are deconstructing actually experience it as real, genuine growth and progress. So hope this episode was helpful for you. Go check Phil's stuff out. He's got tons of stuff. He's a great guy, really cares about this community. And I'll see you guys next time. Love you guys. Bye.